Welcome to AuthentiCity FM, episode 21, our first episode of 2026. I'm Corey Spiegel and delighted to be joined by my friends, colleagues, and co-hosts, Mike Sable and Phil Corrali. The year is off to a wild and crazy start, so it only seems fitting that our kickoff episode is devoted to the topic of disruption. So if you're curious what the year of the fire horse and a pogo ball could possibly have in common with local government, we'll see you on the other side. So you guys had no idea what I was going to say in the open. So hopefully your reactions were as great as they should have been. But who had a pogo ball growing up?
I had a
Did either
pogo
of-
stick, but not a pogo ball, so I need some help.
Those things, I feel like if I had had one, I would have fallen off of it and hurt myself. So probably not. Probably.
Perfect analogy, though. So if you had one, very Gen X toy, apparently you can buy them now, but when I've seen them, they're not made the way they were made in the 80s. But the magic of the pogo ball was that you had to balance, right? So it's a ball, this plastic kind of synthetic whatever, that one foot went on both sides. But you couldn't just stand still, because if you stood still, you would do what Phil would do and fall over, either forward and smash your face or backward and smack your butt. And so as I was thinking of this topic of disruption and the things we're looking forward to talking about in January, I was like, it reminds me of a pogo ball, because you have to stand balanced and use everything you've got to stay balanced, yet keep moving. And so that is my visual representation for what 2026 is going to look like, is how do you keep moving while trying to stay balanced when, quite frankly, the terrain's probably going to be moving under you anyway. And so that was kind of how I thought of opening the year. And in Chinese New Year, which will be in February, we move from the year of the snake, so the idea of shedding, into the year of a fire horse, which kind of sounds exactly like it is. So I did a little research. Here are the characteristics that we are headed into in February: intense energy, boldness and freedom, transformation, and fast-paced. So while you're on your pogo ball, that's the world around us.
That seems appropriate. That seems about right for the first couple of days into the new year. I'm going to say yes. I can accept all of those things. I might make your pogo ball analogy a little bit trickier. It also feels like we would be on like a moving walkway that you would find in an airport, with boulders placed like in the middle that you have to kind of go up and around as well. So it's like a
You have to
really
hop over them while on
Yeah.
the pogo ball.
some
Yeah.
sort of a twisted obstacle course through life for this year. So good. I appreciate that. So thank you.
So the last year of the fire horse, this is fun, was 1966. And as I was researching, it says fire horse years don't create chaos, they accelerate what was already inevitable. And so when we think about disruption in terms of the world around us, and that comes all the way into our daily lives and the communities we serve, it's not actually disruption. Now living in a post-disruption era. And I had shared with you guys an article, and I just want to read this first, kind of two parts of it. So on Axios, it was an article called Behind the Curtain, Your Post-Disruption Playbook, which was written by Jim VandeHei, who is also a UW Oshkosh graduate, and Mike Allen. But first sentence, and I think this couldn't be more perfect. We're locked in the fastest, broadest, most consequential reordering of politics, tech, and business of our lifetimes. And it's a global phenomenon. And so put all that together. Yep, you're in the airport. I think the walkway breaks halfway through also, or is down for maintenance. I don't know, one of the things.
It like is a chasm, actually, that you have to avoid being conveyed into, actually, I would assume.
I feel like there's a Mario Brothers game that probably would give us a good guidepost for
We well,
2026.
we should work with our AI overlords and build something like this and bring it to conferences and have people play the game. So I think
Great
we're onto
idea.
something.
So let's dig into how this, Phil, you and I were talking offline a little bit. Like, how do you operate leadership in a world where you literally don't know what tomorrow's going to bring? And local government, well, all government used to be stable. I would say this week has taught us there's nothing stable about what's happening at the federal level for sure. The rule books are literally changing by the day. But local government used to be very systematic, very policy, very inclusive. And I think the world is going to shake that up, whether or not city management professionals like it or not.
Well, so I think the prescription of the work has always been, I always may be a strong word, but the profession is about planfulness, thoughtfulness, about looking 3, 5, 20 steps down the road, not just right in front of your nose. And I think, as you and I were kind of talking this week, it feels right now like we're not in a zone where thinking 3, 5, 20 steps down the road is valued in the way that it once was. And so when we're in a zone right now where we're kind of like, well, let's break it and see what happens, or let's break it and we don't care what happens. That is a space that I'm not sure that I've um, regularly felt comfortable within. I mean, I think the last time I really started to feel the anxiety around that was, back at the beginning of the pandemic, where we were trying to kind of feel our way in the dark and try to hope to find a light switch. And, somebody would give us some guidance, and then 24 hours later, the guidance would shift 100% the other direction. And you're like, wait, but we just did this thing. Well, throw it away. Let's start over. And that would happen again and again and again. I think it's going to be a struggle for us as we try to navigate not having perhaps the guideposts above us that we could at least look up to and kind of get our bearings and then look back down. We're the guideposts now.
Yeah, it's so funny that you say it that way because I literally had a conversation today with one of my favorite coworkers, and we were talking about election cycles, and we were kind of, we're planning for November, we're planning for our primaries in August. Like we're doing all of the work to get ahead of time because there's like we're responsible stewards of the democracy. Like we actually have to plan these things, and so we were talking about uh, how I don't know if you read the news. So Governor Tim Walz was he was the VP candidate with Kamala Harris, and has decided to not run for governor in the state of Minnesota this week. Huge change. And so we were talking about, well, how might that impact turnout? What's that going to mean for us operationally? Because that's what we do as leaders of local governments, is we hear something, we react to it, we think about it, we change our approach. But we also said, well, we started to talk about partisan politics, about like who might run and who they're going to do this. And we also said, I'm glad we are where we are because there's no partisan way to flush the sewer. Right? I don't care what party you're from. We're going to do it the same way, regardless of who's in charge. Making curb and gutter is going to be the same regardless of what we do. Like there is some value to being the steward of making things work. And so I was really kind of struck with when you talk about this, instability elsewhere. We can create stability in an unstable world, I think, if we're good at it. And if we choose to like think about it that way, of like when there's chaos around, we're going to do the rec programming that's going to work, like be normal in your world. We're going to make sure that the libraries are open so you can do this. Like we're going to do the basic stuff, regardless of whatever's swirling around above us.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. I think part of what we're also going to find ourselves in, though, is because we're going to be walking through more uncharted waters, we're going to find ourselves having to perhaps break our own conventions. We may have to say we can't do this thing the way we've always done it before because the guidance came from somewhere else. That guidance isn't there anymore, or the standard, or whatever. And so we're going to be in that zone of kind of learning to make decisions that aren't policed by anyone else, right? At the local level, we have so many layers of government that kind of help to guide what we do. And I think about it from the standpoint, we're a water producer. So I have a water treatment plant that is governed by EPA, federal EPA standards and state EPA standards. Well, if the federal EPA standards and the state EPA standards aren't aligned anymore, which one do we go with? And so part of what, we're having that conversation is we're going to perhaps have to kind of venture out on our own and make sure we're doing it for the right reasons and we're thinking about the ramifications, but we won't have the guidance that I think we've gotten used to. And one of the things I was saying to Corey earlier this week is, you know, I'm not sure that our brains are really built well. We're trained to be very concerned about negative ramifications of actions, right? We're cautious, we're thoughtful, we're considered, we're taking it all in, we're data driven, and we may not have the luxury of those kinds of thought processes all the time, certainly with certain things. But we're going to find ourselves in a space of saying, nope, going to have to make a call here. And I'm not sure what the outcome is going to be.
So, one of the words I was researching for something else this week was coherence, right? And as I was putting notes together, community becomes the last place coherence is possible. And so we've talked about community in some of our previous episodes, how it was defined, how it's going to be defined going forward. And so one of the things that I wrote was local leaders aren't just managing services anymore. Phil, that's kind of your point. They're quietly holding society together at human scale. And that is both external and internal. And I think we all know people, even in our own traits and how we are alike and different. I love disruption. I love challenging the status quo. I like breaking stuff. And so what's ahead for me is very exciting for local government. I understand that that may not be a majority perspective, and to lead a large organization and to try to keep your own stability and lead with stability for your staff who in some of these service areas are facing that, am I going to have a job? Is this going to be important anymore? I mean, there are so many questions that we're going to face on so many different levels. What does safety look like? We see different versions of what lawful action is all around us right now, and what are the courts going to do? And so finding that, Mike, you always talk about getting grounded. Finding that sense of coherence and inner stability, I think, is going to be the most important thing leaders and local government can do in this first part of the year, because I hate to say it, I think we're just getting warmed up.
So that's one of my great lines at work, and my team they will all laugh at if they hear this. But right, I say, well, the good news is this is only going to get worse. It's going to be that whatever's going to come is going to be something we didn't predict, we couldn't anticipate. It's going to happen faster than we could ever have imagined. Like, it's just going to accelerate and accelerate. And so there is a part of, right, you guys know I'm a yogi. So like this element of grounding is a really important practice in yoga, right? Like actually getting your feet into the earth and like pressing down, and it's sort of really grounding. I have found that just even in the past couple of weeks, I have gone back to paper books and started to read again rather than do Audible, or rather than just read it on a Kindle or on my phone, like that tactile piece. And so we've talked a lot about grandma hobbies. So I'm picked up reading a physical book again as a thing. And I have actually gone back and started to reread some history things. And so I'm going to get the book wrong. I'm not going to get the title right, probably, but it was a book by Tim Marshall. Like it's called like Prisoners of Geography, or How Maps and Geography Shapes the World. And I read it, and Corey, you and I have talked about this. If I had paid attention in 10th grade, I would be so much better today. Because it was like a really deep insight into just, why is this the way it is? Well, the earth is shaped that way, and that's really what makes it that way. And so I actually had to kind of go back to the basics a little bit. But I have found it to be personally helpful in sort of understanding some of the chaos that's around us.
So it's funny you bring up books. I've been reading paper books too. Tim Marshall is one of them I sent you. I think what's interesting is you can actually pull his work forward too to some of what's happening right now. Like it very much foreshadows natural resources, the waterways, protecting the waterways. There's a lot of what is ahead that you can easily foreshadow from where we've come from. But my next door neighbor last year read 53 books. She's a voracious reader. And local distilleries and coffee shops here are now hosting book clubs. And her Gen Z daughter, who's in college, wanted like knitting and needlepoint stuff. And you're seeing these clubs form. It's like so high school, which in all of the good ways, not in all of the bad ways. But you're seeing people create connection around something simple, something tactile, and something that shuts the noise of the world out. And I think you're going to see more and more of that this year, for sure.
Well, and I think, well, it's as probably as much as anything, somewhat of a defense mechanism too, that the onslaught of information in the digital era is so persistent that I do see people kind of stepping away from it and forcing themselves into these hobbies. I was talking to somebody at work who decided to start making soap because they're big gardeners and they've got all these herbs that they've dried from the last season, and they're like, yeah, I just needed something to do that wasn't like death scrolling my phone constantly. And I I just looked it up and I started doing it, and it's great and I love it, and I feel so like refreshed at the end of it, not just because the soap smells good, but because like it's so you've accomplished something. um I was joking about this today. It tells you a little bit about my terrible sense of humor, but I love coming home to a sink full of dishes because I get to load the dishwasher. At the end of a crazy day, loading the dishwasher for me is like solving a puzzle. And at the end of it, even if it's, this is going to take me 5 minutes, let's say it's 5 minutes, but it's like 5 minutes of brain activity that requires like fitting shapes together. And it's like, it's a big game of Tetris to me, which still remains one of my favorite video games ever. But it's funny how those kinds of very mundane, weird things also bring us some level of comfort or some level of calm, right? It brings my spinning brain down several notches in 5 minutes. And it's a chore, right? It's something that we give kids allowances to do, but not in my house because I want to do it, right? I, I want to place everything, and it's gonna feel good, and I'm gonna close that door and say, look at how neat and well placed all of those things are. I'm not
That
sure that's a granny habit, but it's certainly weird. I'll say that.
It's insight into your psyche, because it reminds me of a conversation we had before the holidays about how I had to do car Tetris to take
Yes.
everything we were taking to Colorado
Yep.
out and still be able to
Totally.
see out the rearview mirror. So
I just want to make sure that we're recording this so we give this to Phil's therapist in 5 years to talk about the how
it'll
does a fork go into the dishwasher?
Well, there's a specific way. Don't
Oh,
worry.
oh no, I believe me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am sure in your house there is.
So you have dishwasher OCD. There are rules around the
Yes.
dishwasher.
Absolutely there are. Come on now. Of course there are.
All
but
right.
I'm intrigued.
they're not like, set in stone crazy rules that,
But
I don't
there's
line.
a order
There's
structure.
order. Yep. Hmm.
You're
So
trying
if
to
somebody puts them in
maximize.
wrong, do you fix it?
Absolutely. I will unload dishwashers and reload them. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that
All
will be
right.
out on YouTube for Phil's feature, mental health professionals.
uh,
Uh,
can we please like bookmark a future episode on like quirks for us in
100%.
2026? Okay, like that would be good. Uh but talk about disruption. So a messy dishwasher can be disruptive to some. A perfectly pristine aligned dishwasher will be disruptive for others. Phil, you sort of you touched on a little bit, like there's the digital disruption that I think we all can appreciate and know and love. But I do think that this disruption does feel like it's more than just digital. I think that's why people are reverting to physical activities and tactile things. But also there's this disruption in, I don't believe you anymore. And so my public health official was kind of, we were just kind of talking about, what does it mean if there is ICE in your community, stopping by places to, either, inquire on somebody's status or make an arrest or just, be there physically. If you are a restaurant owner, you're going to be less likely to want government officials in your building. And my public health person was like, we do annual inspections. Like, we show up and we come in, and she has done a really good job of cultivating at least long-term relationships, but she's wondering out loud, I wonder how many years I have left before they stop letting me in. And I do think at some level that, right, disruption in trust does force us to rethink how we work. And I don't have the answer yet, but this is the pogo ball in a right journey.
on black ice. We'll
Yeah,
just go with
oh,
on black
yeah.
ice. We're
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the Midwest
There we
in the
go.
winter.
Yeah.
So that ties to the Axios article, and there's going to be a big report that gets released tomorrow that connects to all this. So I'll put it on our LinkedIn. But 61% of the respondents said mainstream news media can't be trusted. And I don't know if you saw the news today. One of the oldest newspapers in the country in Pittsburgh is closing. I suspect it's the first of many. Politicians are the least trusted source of truth at 22%. So 4 out of 5 people don't trust an elected official. But 1 out of 3 trusts ChatGPT. So think about that. They trust AI more than an elected official or politician, and slightly less than the media. And so I think that's where you're in this squishy, brave new world of what is the truth. And I'd shared with you guys, the book I'm reading is from like the 30s, I think. It's really old. It was originally written in German, so there's lots of fun translation quirks to it. But I think there is some nostalgia that when you're living life on black ice and you literally don't know what the brakes, the gas, or the steering wheel are going to do, that you lean back into. I don't care if it's baking or soap making or, as summer comes, grilling, like these very tactile community-based things. And I suspect you're going to see game nights come back and like neighborhood potlucks. And it's going to be this overt reaction to, if I can't trust what's out in the world in the big sense, I'm going to have to reformulate what I trust in my bubble.
Okay, so we've talked to this about this, like this reversion back to like at a personal level, like we talked about grandma hobbies and tactile things and like grounding elements, but we also work in the chaos. And so issues come up before our communities, and we have open, public hearings, and we have, right, the business of government that we are responsible for shepherding and stewarding through a good process to lead to choices that increase public good. And right, these are like, this is the system of democracy that we are responsible for. I think one of the things that is hard for me right now is being able to articulate what the chaos is, right? It's doesn't, there's not like a source. It's not this thing. We don't have, everything feels like the thing. And so, Phil, Corey, like, how do we put words to things that are unclear or unknown at this point? That's my provocative question for the day. You're both smart, right? You got words for this stuff, right?
I will tell you, I don't, and I think part of you kind of touched on, I guess, how I've been thinking about it, but haven't actually articulated it. It is it is a constant sense of not really knowing how to help people stay focused on what really matters. Um, Whether we're talking and we're in a situation where where I'm seeing it in the general public, where the chaos is impacting their ability to just have a normal day. And so they're looking to us to kind of give me a normal day, give me a something, let me feel a bit normal, more normal. Our staff is doing the same thing. Our families are doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing for ourselves. Like, how do we find that space of saying, um, I get this, I understand it, and I know the way out. And I don't. I, I guess these are things that these are scenarios and situations that we're kind of working our way through that probably do force us to do what you were talking about a while ago, which is to try to revert back to the core. To, in the same way that maybe people are reverting back to how we used to interact with one another and a game night or a bowling league or a book club or something, are we going to kind of lean into the core work, the most basic of local government um, things that are important to people, even though they want us maybe to also do the other stuff too, right? I think I just don't know that we have the margin to do it all.
So I think the challenge is there's no longer a shared definition of truth or fact, right? Phil, you and I were debating a little bit the new vaccine standards and how that impacts us as parents. And so, in a world where opinion prevails, potholes aren't a matter of opinion. Potholes suck. Potholes, when it's raining in the Midwest in January, really suck, right? That's universal. It's not partisan. You can debate which version of asphalt gets applied at what time, whatever. But I think it is going to be this repositioning back to kind of the foundations of local government infrastructure. We talked about that in a past episode, how city managers were often engineers first. Roads, parks, neighborhoods, public safety, although there's a lot of nuance there. If you think about service areas that have scope creeped over time, public safety is one because the world changed a ton, right? I think we talked about one time that, if 90% of your calls are EMS, are you still a fire department? And so those are going to be some questions that have to get wrestled with when the cost structures to everything change. And not that that's a bad thing, like revisiting, it'd be like, should we teach cursive again? There are some times where I think we get too far out over our skis. So getting back to, we're going to focus on the basics. And then if there's not true consensus by those elected to represent the community, then those go on, I always called it a parking lot. Those go over here. They're not forgotten. They're just not part of the strategic plan right now. Because every community needs infrastructure, needs clean water, needs the toilets to flush, telecommunications, whether it's private or public owned, the right of way. There are a lot of basic services that are really important to how everyone lives their daily life.
So I think as we maybe what the disruption is perhaps a bit of that return to the basic. Um, it has not been the thrust that local government has been a part of over the last couple of decades. If anything, we've been pushed to be much more than just the basic, right? We aren't we aren't just filling potholes and repaving streets and driving ambulances to hospitals. We're doing community outreach in ways that we never did before. We're making sure that the unhoused have resources. We're focusing on mental health in ways that perhaps other units of government used to, because we're picking up the slack. I'm not saying we can forego those things, but I do wonder whether some of what we're coming to terms with is a reckoning with the scope of what local government can legitimately do well. Can't, we joke about, Corey was just joking before we were started recording, Phil, you say yes to everything. We do that at the local government level too. We say yes to everything because we're so close to it that saying no doesn't feel responsible. It feels irresponsible. And yet, when we don't have the resources, what we're doing is we're burning out our teams. We're over burdening our tax levies. We're pushing resources perhaps away from things that really need them in an effort to do something else that we don't do well. And I think that's something that we have to come to terms with a bit in an environment when everybody really is going to be looking to us to try to pick up the slack for what the state or the feds aren't going to do for us anymore. And I think it's a real tug of war for local governments who really recognize the need in their communities and want to be of help.
Corey, go ahead. I had
Well,
two thoughts after.
I was gonna take it on a journey. So if you have
I
something related, go for it.
let's go on the journey together.
All right. So that made me think of something I read in the Washington Post this week about the mega data centers. And we know many of our colleagues are facing this question in predominantly suburban and rural areas. And it ties exactly to what you said, Phil. We're talking about resources. These are massive facilities. They are huge consumers of water and power, typically. They are not job producers per se. So if we go to kind of legacy economic development, you were either a sales tax state or a property tax state. And if you were a property tax state, you wanted the jobs. If you're a sales tax state, you wanted the retail. And data centers flip all of this on its side, because what do they produce locally? Now, if you're a property tax state, probably not so bad, depending on if you're the utility or not. But you're starting to see these huge community efforts to stop projects. And I've seen more and more about how communities are just saying, not yet, no thanks, or not without a better plan. And that's probably the first time in local government history since maybe nuclear power where you've seen communities having that reaction.
So that kind of actually ties into how we started with, right? We used to be stable. We used to be systematic, right? We planned out 20 years. Like, oh, I know which roadway project we're going to do in 5 years because I've got the CIP that's going to guide me there. If I have a data center in there and it's going to eat up 30% of our water supply, are we going to have enough water pressure? Like, so that is that sort of that black swan kind of idea in our communities that I don't think anybody prepared for, of like, oh, we don't actually have the production capability to serve this thing that is over here and the rest of the people. And so that little bit of uprising, I think, is natural because it is rooted in that, right? It's a fear, right? This thing is going to impact my life in a way that I'm not prepared for. We haven't talked about. We don't know what the implications are. Hold on a minute. And so there's this, I'm not surprised that there is the pushback because there is so much uncertainty. And then I think underlaying all of that is that, right, all of the trust in the, most of the distrust and the division that we see in the world, we see digitally. Its home is in the server farm right down the street from us that's sowing this division and this uncertainty. So do I really want this awful product housed, right, in my neighborhood? Like, it's a double whammy, right? I'm already getting inundated with negativity and like all of these things that are wrong and this sowing of distrust. And it's also this thing that's making it, right? These electrons that are over here producing all this power is also then making my life, it's impacting my physical life differently. I think that's a really natural thing. I don't know that I have come up with sort of some insight as to how we as city leaders bridge that, but I think part of our job is to articulate and give voice to that fear. And then when it's out on the table, then we can kind of wrestle with it and come up to a good conclusion. But, as part of that article, we talked about this, right? These sort of server farms that are built that are never going to be operated is also one of these things about, right? This global pursuit of more is actually leaving us with less. So, Phil, bail me out, please.
You need no bailing. I think that you hit it on the head, but I would also perhaps reckon to say that it isn't new, that phenomenon has existed. And yes, maybe it's matriculating in the concern around what does it mean with data centers or the server farms or whatever. But look, it's by any other name, it's NIMBYism too, right? I don't want that here for X reason. In this case, it may be, putting that here is bad because we don't have the resources to support it, or it's going to drain the resources that we have, which are going to make all those resources more expensive for somebody else. But when we change the topic to affordable housing, or change the topic to workforce housing, or something of that nature, where communities struggle to meet the needs of their community, right? Of the people that either live there already or wants to live there, and you face that resistance, that pushback to say, that's going to take too many of our resources. The schools are going to be overrun. The police department is going to have to work harder, and I don't like that. So don't do it, right? And so we have always found ourselves kind of at the crossroads of having to navigate what is right for our broader community up against what the broader community thinks is right for it. And it's a complicated place, I think, for us to have to sit, especially though I do think the equation has shifted a bit, and whether we're talking about a data center or something along those lines, it's the why comes into question perhaps more than it used to. Why here? Why this? Why now? So yeah.
It made me think of, remember when Walmart was expanding way back when? It's the same conversations, except for it was colors and then the land use bingo card of noise, lights, traffic. The usuals.
So that's actually a little bit comforting, right? I hadn't thought about it in those kinds of like terms, but yeah, I mean, we have been pretty successful at sort of navigating that trade-off about this housing development is going to bring traffic and it's going to bring noise and it's going to bring, right? I had one example where there was a section of the sidewalk that had never been sort of fully built out. And so we were going to make a connecting piece, and somebody was like, well, now the criminals are going to be able to access these properties. And I was like, well, probably could have done it before anyways, but I don't think anybody's going to be walking down the street carrying the TV that they stole from your house. But that those irrational fears are maybe have always been there, and we have found a way to sort of navigate them a little bit. I want to just go back to something that you guys, I don't remember who said it because I haven't done this in a long time, so I've been out of practice because
you were on sabbatical.
Shout out to Mike Land for subbing in. I really appreciate it. Was fun to actually listen to an episode that I had no idea what was going to be said. So for podcast viewers, like, subscribe, go back, watch previous episodes, give us some feedback. But I wanted to go back to this concept of like recentering teams and getting the team to our own organizations to kind of be regrounded in service and just kind of doing the as my friend Tom Harmoning would say, drink, drive, and flush. Like, if we can do those things, like, that's great. Like, we can do the basics really well. But as the world gets more complicated, as decisions get harder, as choices get harder, I do think it is incumbent on local government leaders to hear more from frontline voices in a way that, right? So I talk to my council, I talk to our department heads, I talk to other managers in the region, but I don't talk to frontline service providers in the same way. I'm always fascinated, right? Your public works, your park maintenance crew probably knows more about what's going on in the community than probably anybody else because they're in it every day and they see everything that's going on. And so I do think one of the things that we have to work on as leaders in our profession is finding ways to get more voice from frontline and using that data point more and more frequently and more quickly in terms of our decision-making process. So it's a fairly provocative idea. I don't know exactly how to do it, but reactions or comments?
You gonna go? You want me to
Yeah.
go? We both breathed in at the same time.
No, it was so great. I
It was
felt
like a
like
Coke drink.
I felt like that was Corey.
It
I
was
did
me.
too. Yeah.
So I think part of it gets to the generational management biases, right? Or even power structure and authority biases that, and we've talked about this before, that the chain of command has to be preserved at all costs. And as parents, we know that that's not true. Like, um, everything's been flattened, organizations are flattened. And so I think embracing the idea of mesh networks. And if you've ever done kind of leading edge law enforcement, social network analysis, understanding where those levers exist. Not everybody's going to want to talk to the city manager. There are a lot of, especially frontline employees, who aren't, but there are also many who will. And so I think part of managing this post-disruption era is redefining what trust looks like on the individual basis in an ethical way. And that's something local government can do better than anyone because the intentions and the motives are there. We're not profit motivated. We're not speed motivated. And for the most part, politics, capital P, don't live inside those institutions. And so I think being willing to listen, and that is going to be part of the slowdown, right? Like everything else is going to happen so much faster. You're going to write staff reports faster. You're going to be able to engineer things faster. You're going to be able to bid things faster, right? There are going to be so many improvements. We had talked offline about how getting paid by Venmo for something I'd worked on was like the coolest, most mind-blowing thing that happened to me last year because it was so anti-government, right? Like, I'm like, oh yeah, cool. That works. And so I think it's the Pogo ball, man. You're going to have to balance. There are going to be so many things that are easier and faster that it is worth the investment to slow down on the other stuff because that's where the real magic's going to happen.
Well, I mean, I think, isn't it, we say it a lot, but isn't it true that, the most underrated skill is the ability to effectively and thoughtfully listen? Um, and look, I'm not good at it all the time. My organization isn't good at it all the time when we're dealing with the broader community. Um, but I do think at the local level, we're better at it than almost anybody else. Um, and I think it underscores such a commitment to caring about how to do something, right? And as I was talking before about, well, maybe we're gonna kind of try to revert to that core. You can't really do that if you don't know what that means. You can't really focus on what matters if you don't know what people care about. And I think it's incumbent in these times, particularly, to have those moments, those opportunities for thoughtful and considered listening, um, to what folks are struggling with and dealing with. I'm going to roll calls this week for my public safety department, and I try to do it somewhat regularly. And uh, you know, last night I was there, and I got peppered with more questions than I can recall ever getting in those circumstances. Because usually, to Corey's point, the city manager comes in the room and the air immediately leaves the room, and everybody is like suddenly mute. And they just do a lot of this. They just nod affirmatively. Everything you say, and then you walk out of the room and they, shake their fists at you. But last night I didn't have that. And I got peppered with a series of questions, and none of them were mean spirited. None of them were trying to pin me down, but they caught me off guard, and it forced me to kind of say, oh, well, I didn't know that was a thing that you guys were worried about. Oh, I thought this was the problem. This is the problem. Oh, okay. So, and I will say the only way you get to that point is repetition, because it's not going to happen the first time. And so if it doesn't happen the first or the second or the fifth time, that means you go back for the sixth or the eighth or the 10th or whatever, because it will happen at some point. And I think that's true with our communities too. Like, not everybody's going to come is going to come out to an open house when you're talking about something important. So you do it again, and you continue to do it, and you make it less uncomfortable. Because I think that too is that anti-digital relationship, right? You are a real person sitting behind a real table, here to listen to a real person with a real problem. And gosh, isn't that important in the way we deliver the things that we deliver? I don't know. I think it's a unique chance for us to kind of return to those roots too.
So I don't want to jump too far ahead, but we like, there's a method to our madness when we do a podcast. Like, we don't just throw things together. Like, we try to have a little bit of structure. And so I've taken what I would describe as copious notes. I might
That
have
is copious for you. Yeah.
9, 14. I have like 23 words on here. Like, I'm exhausted.
New
But-
year, new mic.
But I there's something that you said that, like, when there was a part you talked about where Corey talked about, like, we don't know what we don't know. And then there's also something about we often don't know what people care about. And so there's a training that I do in my organization. I've done it. If you've been to Leading Edge at the University of Kansas or at Charleston, it's taught there. So look for us. It's a great program. We've got one coming up in March. But it's the whole point is that over the course of our careers, we sort of move up this ladder where, like, we don't know what we don't know. And then we start to get a little smarter. So we recognize what we don't know, and then we train and we learn and we grow, and then we get really good at it. So we know what we're doing. We know what we're talking about. And then we reach the next step, which is sort of the dangerous one, which is we just run on autopilot. And so if I tell the story about thinking it like a car, right? When you're a kid, you're just in the back, you just get in and you just end up at grandma's house. Like, that's right. You don't know how you got there. You just got there. And then you hit that magic age, you get to sit in the front seat. And then you start to notice, well, there's this lever does something, or this button does something. I'm not sure how it works, but man, I'm curious. That's where learning starts. And then they get into driver's ed, and then there's learning that happens there. And then if you're like us, I know that, Corey, you had a road trip. Phil, you had a road trip recently. I venture to guess you probably went 100 miles at one point without paying attention. You just sort of were on autopilot. And I think a lot of our government systems are on autopilot, and because we don't know what we're doing. Forecasting, next episode in January, is going to be all about invisible systems. And I think that is partially why we're where we are, because nobody stops to say, what are we trying to actually do? And is what we're trying to do different? Has the expectation changed? And I don't think, I think good organizations break it apart regularly and talk about it. I think for a lot of us, and a lot of organizations, a lot of systems have been on autopilot for too long, and it's too dangerous. It's too dangerous a world to be on autopilot at this point.
So I can't say I didn't pay attention for 100 miles, but I will say So the first chunk of our drive was 12 hours, right? 16 hours both ways. And with the exception of a pocket outside of Lincoln where there was road construction, thanks to adaptive cruise control and lane keep assist, I didn't have my foot on the gas or the brake for more than 45 minutes of the 12-hour drive. And it was so noticeable that I actually tracked it because I'm like, this is weird, right? Like I-80 is just a treat in the winter, let me tell you. But I think, Mike and Phil and I were talking about this sort of offline systems, and I think we just evolve, right? We duct tape and WD-40, all the things. But there's something I think that is really interesting that happened, and it doesn't connect directly to local government, but it will as an employer, I think, in the time to come. And so late last year, Big Pharma, Eli Lilly, debuted direct-to-consumer solutions, especially for their GLP-1s. So basically, your doctor, Big Pharma, whatever pharmacy they choose, and you. Who's missing? Big insurance. Big insurance got completely chopped right out of the business model. Which, if we would have talked about that a year ago, I think we would have all said, no, there's no way. And so you then layer on AI, right? And so if you've been following Mark Cuban at all lately, you've seen he has been going at the planned benefit administrators hard. And so I think one of the areas we're going to see, and this is the you don't know what you don't know, insurance. Now, does it need reform in our country? 100%. As an employer, yes. As a resident, as an individual, yes. The system is so broken. But think about that. One company decided we're going to do it differently, and they cut out the biggest impediment. And you went from $1,200 a month or whatever it was for the insurance pay through down to, I don't know, 300, 400, whatever the price is nowadays. That tells me there is a lot of bloat in that invisible system. And so if one company can make the decision to do that on one product, it tells me there is a lot more behind it. And then you get people like Mark Cuban saying these planned benefit administrators, and then let's throw in AI and AI decision making. I think health insurance, and think about it, you guys probably both run your plans one way or another, is going to look fundamentally different a year from now too. And that is a system that deserves a good swift kick and beat down.
Well, and so any invisible system, the problem with it is not necessarily the opportunity to fix it, but the fear around what that means, right? So the people who are willing to take the risk to say, we're going to cut big insurance out of this whole equation, there's a risk that goes along with that. And it was a risk that, in this case, they probably said was worth taking. The struggle, and this is one of the things that you and I were talking about, Corey. The struggle is the risk when we're talking about government or government services, particularly, is that if we break it, who is hurt by that? Right. And so that keeps us in that zone of caution. We will set these very narrow parameters of guardrails, and we can bounce between those guardrails, but God forbid we bounce over the guardrail, because who knows what's on the other side of that thing. And I think that's the hard part. And it's as simple. We're doing a space needs analysis for some of our facilities. And we met with the architects who were working with us and had this sit down. And one of the things I said was, I think we have to fundamentally reconsider how we do customer service in this organization. And that means we may not need to dedicate the kind of space or resources to 8 to 4 customer service that we have in the past. Mike, this is what you talked about several podcasts ago. And when I said it out loud, I looked around the table and everyone was looking at me like, are you kidding? What, if we don't do that, what are we doing? we're not helping the community if we're not here
Mhm.
from 8 to 4. And I said, how many of you schedule your time when you're running errands between 8 and 4? And make time on from Monday through Friday, by the way, Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, and make time. Are you going to take off work to go to Village Hall and pick up your building permit? Hell no. You're trying to do so. It's such a, we have not built disruption into our daily lives in local government. In fact, we've built smooth surfaces into everything. And so when we start talking about anything that feels like a choppy situation, you start talking about cutting insurance out of decision making, and guess who freaks out? Everyone in your organization. Well, how am I gonna? But and I've got and this and what about and pre-existing and I've got this and so it's. I mean, I think the courage on our side as we're contemplating this, and again, I still see it as kind of coming back to the core. What's the core piece of this that we continue to find the opportunity in? But we're going to have to be uncomfortable. It's going to be rocky, and we're on that pogo ball again.
Yeah, that was great, and I appreciate kind of how that 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 came out. I think there's something that you said, and I would say, um, we build these systems that everybody has to buy, right? I'm speaking to city managers here. You guys know the struggle. No one likes using it, but you're forced into having something, and so, right, you've got to have this like software system that you don't really like because it makes things automatic, because it helps us to not have to think about it. And I think that's what we're doing is we built something once and we stopped thinking about it. Like, okay, oh, we got this thing done. Cool. Let's move on to the other thing. And no one goes back and say, does this thing meet what we're trying to do? Does this thing need to change? Does this meet the environment that we're in today? Right. And there's a really boring story, but right, there's the company that invented the digital camera was Kodak. They made films, so they were like, wow, we don't want to lose out on our filmmaking money, so we're gonna put the digital camera in the drawer. And then however many years later, Nikon, Canon, all of these companies built the digital camera, and 30,000 employees disappeared in the state of New York seemingly overnight because Kodak didn't decide right? Somebody made a strategic blunder, or they didn't look at the environment around them and how it was changing and how it might impact their business. That's why it's incumbent on us as leaders to force the questions of our leadership team. What are we seeing in the environment that's different? What are we seeing that's going to be here? How is Axon designing new digital cameras in eyewear so our police officers can record what they're seeing rather than have it on their chest? Like, that wave is coming, and it's going to be crazy expensive, incredibly cool, fraught with peril in terms of what we record and what we don't and what we keep. Like, if you think digital evidence is expensive now running a police department, uh, just wait. It's only going to get worse. And so I do think, going back to kind of this piece about why we're talking about disruption so much, is we're responsible for having the discussion about what to do about it. Like, it's our responsibility. And so we're going to build some tools in for the rest of this episode and the rest of the month. But Corey, I know I saw the thought pop into your head. So what's your thought?
Well, when you were talking about it, it reminded me of talking about switching costs, right? So once you're into one of those enterprise systems, getting out, whether real or perceived, is the barrier. It doesn't matter how bad it sucks. It's the idea that it's purely switching costs. And so then as you talk about Kodak, and there are so many of those stories. Phil, I remember being at an ILCMA conference a couple years ago, and the lunchtime keynote was talking about how many of, I think it was the Fortune 50s, maybe the Fortune 100s, I don't remember which, but how many in 2000 existed in 2022 or 2023, right? And it was a fraction. And yeah, there's a lot of M&A, but when we think about what technology is going to do, the household names that we grew up with, or even as adults, are going to be gone and there's going to be new ones. And I mean, think about it from content. When Google bought YouTube, I don't think Google knew what 2025 and beyond was going to be. It's the number one source of content in the world. We're losing newspapers. I still say network TV's toast. Like the idea of flipping a channel with a grid of channel choices, gone, right? Like, and so it's not all bad. It's just different. And I think finding that balance in, I don't know what it's going to be, but I know it's going to be different and I know we're going to make it okay, right? That's the one thing local government, communities that face tragedies, weather events, whatever it is, they are always resilient and there is always something that is learned, is better, is different on the other side. And trying to use that as your true north as a city manager, department head, or a frontline employee through this, I don't know, but we're going to work through it together. That's probably the subhead for this year because it's going to change, it's going to be different, it's going to be scary, and in the end it's going to be okay.
Phil, I can see it in your eyes, man. You were there, you stopped. This is the beauty of the camera. So if you're listening on Spotify or if you're listening on the Apple Podcasts, sometimes the looks on the screen are more telling, right? A lot is said in body language. Let's hear it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that I don't know that I have anything profound to add to that. I think what's what I have found myself doing more than I ever would have thought I would have done when I was an intern is actually questioning what it is we do. And when I say that, it's not like what is this profession about? It's not that. It's the actual why do we do this question. I came of age in this profession when the sky was the limit, the early 2000s. Everybody was flush. Everything was, we were on autopilot and adding programs and adding staff and adding tax opportunities and revenue streams that were never ending. And then 2008 hit. And more with less became what we did, right? And so, but even in the more with less zone, I don't remember asking the question as much as I have been lately of myself and of my team of why. Why do we do it? What was the impetus for this? And it's an important question. And I think the why is so critical because the action, what's the old adage that, you always ask why someone built the fence before you tear it down. But are we asking why all that much? And if we're not, why is that? Because it is the most important question today. The why question is our defining element in local government because look, there are private enterprises that can do a lot of the things that we do. We contract with them already, right? We're putting resources toward that. There are technology solutions for literally everything. And the real question is, why do we have a technology solution to solve that problem? Is that even a problem worth solving anymore? And it's such an earth-shattering question for some people because you've never thought about it. You just do it. It's the thing. It's it's my reason for being here. That's why I do it. Well, what if we could do something else? And in this, and I'm so, I think this next several episodes that we have coming are really going to let us kind of dig into what the future starts to look like in an environment where perhaps it's chaos all around, right? There's fire and smoke and everything, and we're kind of like focused out into the future despite all of those things because we have to. What's the alternative? we can't hide in a cave and hope that it stops. We have to keep pumping water and taking sewage and plowing streets and patrolling and doing all of the things, because that's our why. That really is our why. How we do it is different, but that when you start to talk about the why, that's where it can really be foundational. And so I just think that these months ahead of us are going to force the question perhaps more than we're comfortable, and that's okay.
I can't wait.
So you alluded to our upcoming episodes, and if you've been with us through the first 20 episodes, you know our dear friend Mike Sable prides himself on not preparing. But something magical happened over the holidays when he was on sabbatical, is he actually prepared like the whole next set of our whys, our so whats. And so, Mr. Sable, tell us about the episodes ahead.
I actually think it was remorse for having taken an episode off. I was like sort of like my penance to sort of propel and move us forward. But we pride ourselves in, like, even the idea of doing a podcast was sort of a disruption. Like, let's just do this thing and see what it works. And so this concept of disruption emerged early on. And so I really thought we could do a deep dive on it. So this was sort of the introduction. Welcome back to Welcome 2026. Talk about something I think really important. Next week, we're going to get into systems. We're going to actually get inside the machine. My friend and colleague, Jerry Dreesen, works for an AI process intelligence company called Solonis. They essentially go inside of our machines that operate on autopilot, and they start to identify uh, all of the steps in the process and finding ways to make it more efficient, make it automated. But really, I think understanding, because I think, right, when you think about what it takes to issue a payroll, a paycheck, right, there are probably 50 things that have to happen, and none of us actually know how all of them work. But through the use of AI, they're able to do that and then give you a picture and then say, here, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100 things you could do to make it better. That is like a game changer in terms of that. So we're going to talk about systems that actually going inside the machine. The week after that, we're going to have our friend and colleague, Rebecca Ryan, a wonderful futurist, a Wisconsin native, a brilliant thinker who's been around local government and been a wonderful friend and colleague for a long time. Talking about sort of forecasting, helping us zoom out and understanding what's coming. And so she has some really specific tools that helps do that. And then I want to get into the last bit is sort of the next generation. And so we're going to be interviewing some local government management fellows who are actually going to inherit the stuff that we break. And we've kind of done it. Well, I mean, honestly, like in 25 years, the people
Exactly
that we're
right.
going to be interview are going to be like,
Why?
why? Well, I mean, I can't believe they let me do this work. But so I've kind of framed it in like really three ways, right? So systems, signals, and stewards, I think, are the kind of key ways to talk about it. How do we understand the systems that help us drive our change? How do we look for signals rather than just noise? And then how do we embolden and embrace kind of our role as stewards, both of our organizations and our communities, but also the next generation of local government management? And so, Corey, how'd I do?
You are an evil genius, and we all know it. We're very proud. Very proud.
Semi-evil,
No,
just a
Mm.
little.
I feel terrible having missed an episode. So it was, but Mike Land did a great job. He was funny and charming, and I still don't know what the little hedgehog thing means, but I've seen it several times. So I always appreciate Mike Land.
So I think that is a beautiful summation of what's ahead for us in January of 2026. I am eternally grateful to both of you for saying yes when I said why not early in 2025. I think this journey has been fascinating and really exciting for all of us. And I can't even imagine where 2026 is going to take us. And we are grateful for everyone who is liking, subscribing, tuning in. Although I have heard lately, I've seen that that's no longer the measure. Phil, and you and I were talking about how nobody knows what's inside the black box of why things work. And so now apparently like and subscribe are less important and engagement with the audiences is more important. So we're going to try and figure it out as 3 Gen Xers and not really knowing what we're doing still. But we appreciate that you stuck with us this far.
Thanks, everybody.
Forward to a great year ahead and a lot of awesome conversations. Thanks, everyone.